July 7th, 1941. The sun is a scorching ball of fire, hanging low in the sky as we march eastward. The dust from the road clings to our boots, turning the once black leather into a dull, ashen grey. But none of us care. The mood among the men is high. There's a palpable excitement in the air, like we're on the cusp of something great, something historic. And in a way, we are. Every step we take is a step closer to victory, or so it seems. The rumors spread quickly through the ranks the Soviets are in full retreat, their forces crumbling before the might of the Wehrmacht. Some say Kiev will fall within days, and will be drinking to our success in its grand squares by the end of the month. I can almost taste the sweet wine on my tongue, feel the cold glass in my hand. It's a strange thought, here in the middle of nowhere, with the road stretching endlessly before us, and the enemy somewhere far ahead. But it's thoughts like these that keep us moving, keep our spirits up. I'm only a few months into my service, yet already the world feels like it has changed. Back home, they were all so proud, my mother, my father, even my little sister, who cried when I left. I wrote them a letter last week, telling them not to worry, that I'm safe, that we're winning. It wasn't a lie. So far, everything has gone as planned. The Führer's vision is becoming a reality right before our eyes, and we're the ones making it happen. Our march today has taken us through fields of wheat, golden under the afternoon sun, the kind of landscape that would make any painter reach for his brush. The locals watch us from a distance, their faces blank, as if they know better than to show any emotion. They don't cheer, but they don't resist either, just quiet acceptance, or maybe resignation. It's strange to see them so passive. Don't they know we're liberating them from the Bolsheviks? We passed through a village earlier, a place so small it didn't even have a name on the map. The houses were little more than shacks, their roofs sagging under the weight of time. A few chickens pecked at the dirt, and a single dog barked as we marched by. The villagers gathered at the roadside, silent as ghosts. I looked at them, trying to imagine what they were thinking. Were they afraid? Relieved? It was impossible to tell. But one thing was clear: this was a land untouched by the modern world, a place frozen in time. Our officers say this is why we're here, to bring order, civilization, the light of the Reich to these backward lands. It's an idea I've grown up with, but now, seeing it with my own eyes, I wonder if they even want what we're offering. Do they even understand? I push the thought aside. It's not for me to question, it's for me to follow orders, to do my duty. That's what I tell myself as we continue marching, the sun sinking lower, casting long shadows across the road. The men around me are talking, joking, laughing as if we're on a grand adventure. My friend Carl is beside me, his rifle slung over his shoulder, whistling a tune that reminds me of home. He's the kind of guy who can find humor in any situation, always quick with a joke or a grin. We'll be in Kiev by Sunday, he says, nudging me with his elbow. You'll see, and then it's on to Moscow. We'll be home by Christmas, mark my words. I nod, smiling back, though I wonder if he's right. The advance has been so fast, so smooth, it's easy to believe the whole Soviet Union will collapse just as quickly. And why not? Everything we've encountered so far points to their weakness, their army, their leadership, their very spirit. They're not like us. They don't have the discipline, the resolve. They're no match for the Wehrmacht. But as the day wears on, something begins to gnaw at the edge of my thoughts, a small, persistent doubt that I can't quite shake. It's the landscape, I think, the vastness of it, the way the horizon stretches on forever, unbroken by mountains or forests. It's a land that seems to swallow you whole, that could hide entire armies in its folds. It's beautiful in a way, but also intimidating. A land that doesn't care who marches across it, who claims it. As we set up camp for the night, I try to push these thoughts away. The fire crackles in front of me, and the smell of cooking meat fills the air. The men are relaxed, their conversations easy and light. I join in, laughing at Carl's latest joke, but my mind keeps drifting back to that endless horizon, to the village with its silent, staring inhabitants, and to the thought of what lies ahead. Tomorrow, we continue toward Kiev. I'll keep writing, keep recording my thoughts, because I want to remember this feeling of being part of something bigger, something destined to succeed. But I can't help but wonder what the next few days will bring. Victory, surely. But what will it look like? And at what cost? I shake my head. These are thoughts for another time, another place. For now, I'm here with my comrades, on the march to glory, and nothing can stop us, not now. July 10th, 1941. We've made good progress. Every day brings us closer to Kiev. The road has been easier than expected, the resistance minimal. A few skirmishes here and there, nothing serious. The Soviet troops we've encountered are poorly equipped, poorly trained. They scatter like leaves in the wind. Is this the Red Army that was supposed to be so fearsome? It's hard to believe. I wrote to my mother again today, telling her how well things are going. I didn't mention the heat, or the dust, or the blisters on my feet. Why worry her with such details? Better she thinks of me marching triumphantly toward victory, my uniform clean, my spirits high. And why not? That's how it feels most of the time. Carl and I have fallen into a rhythm. We march side by side, talking about everything and nothing, keeping each other's spirits up. Just think, he said this morning, by this time next week, we could be in Kiev. Maybe we'll even catch a glimpse of Stalin's troops as they flee eastward. He laughed at the thought, and I couldn't help but laugh with him. It all seems so possible, so within our grasp. But then, there are the moments that give me pause. Like yesterday, when we found a burned-out Soviet tank by the side of the road. It was old, rusted in places, a relic of another era. But it had put up a fight, that much was clear. The ground around it was scorched, the air still smelling of smoke, and beside it, the bodies half a dozen Soviet soldiers lying where they fell. I looked at them, trying to see them as the enemy, as obstacles to our victory. But all I saw were men, not so different from us, who had died far from home. I didn't write about that in my letter. July 12th, 1941. The sky is a brilliant blue today, not a cloud in sight. The heat is oppressive, the kind that makes you want to crawl under a tree and sleep until evening. But we march on, determined, driven by the promise of victory. I can feel it. We all can, that something big is about to happen. Kiev is close now, the prize almost within our grasp. We've been told to expect more resistance as we get closer to the city, but so far it's been nothing we can't handle. The Soviets are outmatched, outgunned. If this is the best they've got. Carl said this morning, then we'll be in Moscow by autumn. We'll have this whole country under our boots before they even know what hit them. There's a swagger in his voice, a confidence that I've come to associate with all of us. We're invincible. How could we not be? But as the sun sets and we prepare to camp for the night, I can't shake the feeling that there's something more waiting for us, something we haven't yet seen. The horizon is still out there, endless and unmoving, and beyond it Kiev. A city that, according to the maps, is vast and old, with streets that have seen countless armies march through them. What will we find there? What kind of enemy awaits us in the heart of the Soviet Union? I don't have the answers, but I know that tomorrow will bring us closer to them. And whatever happens, I'll be ready. We all will. Because this is what we've trained for, what we've dreamed of. A march of triumph, leading us straight to victory, July 16th, 1941. The first sign that something was different came with the dawn. We were woken early, long before the sun had fully risen, the sky still a deep, bruised blue. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth, and something else, something metallic and sharp that set my nerves on edge. I couldn't place it at first, but as we prepared to move out, I realized what it was: the smell of gunpowder. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it was there, hanging in the air like a ghost. The march today felt different too. The mood among the men was more subdued, the usual banter replaced by a tense silence. Carl, normally so full of jokes and laughter, walked beside me with a furrowed brow, his eyes scanning the horizon. We had heard rumors the night before, whispers of Soviet troops regrouping, of a possible counterattack. Nothing confirmed, of course, just the kind of talk that circulates in the quiet moments before sleep. But now, as the morning wore on and the sun climbed higher in the sky, those whispers began to feel more real. The landscape around us was changing too. Gone were the open fields of wheat and the small, sleepy villages. Instead, we found ourselves moving through denser, more rugged terrain forests of tall, dark trees that loomed on either side of the road, their shadows long and foreboding. As we pressed on, the feeling of unease grew. The road ahead seemed to stretch on forever, winding through the trees like a serpent. The birds that had filled the air with their songs in the previous days were silent now, as if they too sensed that something was coming. I tried to shake off the feeling, to focus on the rhythm of my footsteps, the weight of my rifle on my shoulder. But it was no use. The silence was too heavy, too full of anticipation. And then, just after midday, it happened. The first shot rang out like a crack of thunder, shattering the silence. For a moment, everything seemed to freeze. Time itself held its breath. Then, all at once, the forest erupted into chaos. Bullets whizzed past us, tearing through the leaves and splintering the trees. Shouts filled the air as we scrambled for cover, the road suddenly a battlefield. I threw myself into a ditch at the side of the road, my heart pounding in my chest. Dirt and debris rained down around me as more shots rang out, each one closer than the last. I could hear the cries of the wounded, the frantic orders being shouted by our officers. But above it all, I could hear the roar of enemy fire, a sound that sent a chill down my spine. This wasn't a small skirmish, a minor resistance. This was something else entirely. For what felt like an eternity, we held our ground, returning fire as best we could. The Soviets were hidden in the trees, their positions nearly impossible to pinpoint. They were like ghosts, moving through the forest with deadly precision. I could see the flashes of their rifles, but the men behind them remained invisible, concealed by the thick underbrush. Beside me, Carl was cursing under his breath as he fired off a shot, then ducked back down. "Where the hell are they?" he muttered, his voice tight with frustration. I didn't have an answer. All I knew was that we were pinned down, and every attempt to advance was met with a hail of bullets. The minutes dragged on, each one feeling like an hour. My hands were shaking as I reloaded my rifle, my fingers clumsy with fear. I kept my head down, trying to make myself as small as possible, but it was no use. The enemy was everywhere, and nowhere all at once, a shadow in the trees that we couldn't seem to touch. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, it was over. The gunfire ceased, leaving a deafening silence in its wake. For a moment, I didn't dare move, half expecting another volley to come crashing down on us. But the silence held, broken only by the moans of the wounded and the distant rustle of the wind through the trees. Slowly, I lifted my head, peering over the edge of the ditch. The road was littered with debris, fallen branches, spent shell casings, and the bodies of our comrades. It was a scene of devastation, and yet the enemy was nowhere to be seen. They had vanished as quickly as they had appeared, melting back into the forest like smoke. I pulled myself out of the ditch, my legs unsteady beneath me. Around me, the other men were doing the same, their faces pale and drawn. We were alive, but the cost had been high. Too high. We had lost too many good men in that ambush, and for what? To gain another few miles of road. To push the enemy back a few more steps. As we regrouped, I caught sight of one of our officers talking to a prisoner, a Soviet soldier who had been captured in the chaos. He was young, not much older than me, with a face that was gaunt and hollow, his uniform tattered and stained. But there was something in his eyes, something I hadn't seen before, a fierce determination, a stubborn defiance that sent a shiver down my spine. I watched as the officer questioned him, demanding to know where the rest of his unit was, where they had come from. But the prisoner said nothing, his lips pressed into a thin line. Even when the officer struck him, the man remained silent, his eyes fixed on some distant point beyond us, as if we weren't even there. It was then that I first heard the name Mikhail Ivanov, one of the other prisoners, under the threat of violence, finally spoke up, saying that Ivanov was the officer leading the resistance in this area. A name spoken with a mix of fear and respect, like he was something more than just a man. A symbol, maybe, of the Soviet resolve that we were only beginning to understand. I didn't think much of it at the time, just another name in a war filled with them. But later that night, as we set up camp, I found myself thinking about that prisoner, about the look in his eyes, and about the way he had held his silence, even in the face of death. It wasn't the look of a man who was beaten. It was the look of a man who was ready to die for something he believed in. The thought unsettled me, more than I wanted to admit. I tried to push it away, to focus on the here and now, on the fire crackling in front of me, on the faces of my comrades lit by its glow. But the memory of that ambush lingered, a shadow in the back of my mind. And for the first time since this march began, I felt a flicker of doubt. What if the Soviets weren't as broken as we had been led to believe? What if they were stronger, more determined than we had imagined? What if this war wasn't going to be over as quickly as we thought? I didn't write these thoughts down. I didn't dare. Instead, I kept them locked away, deep inside, where they couldn't reach the surface, where they couldn't take root and grow. I told myself it was just a moment of weakness, a fleeting doubt that would pass with time. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. Tomorrow, we would continue our march. We would push forward, as we always did, with our eyes fixed on Kiev. But now, the road ahead didn't seem as clear, as certain as it had before. Now, there was a shadow on the horizon, a shadow with a name, Mikhail Ivanov, and it was a shadow that I couldn't ignore. July 20th, 1941. The days that followed were a blur of movement and exhaustion. We pressed on, deeper into Soviet territory, the forests giving way to open fields once more. But the memory of that ambush lingered, casting a pall over our every step. The men were quieter now, their faces set in grim determination. Gone was the easy confidence that had carried us this far. In its place was something harder, colder resolve born of necessity, of the knowledge that this war was far from over, and that the enemy we faced was far more formidable than we had thought. We encountered more resistance as we moved closer to Kiev. Small skirmishes, hit and run attacks that slowed our advance but didn't stop it. Each one was a reminder that the Soviets weren't going to give up without a fight, that they were still out there, watching us, waiting for the right moment to strike. And always, in the back of my mind, was the name Mikhail Ivanov. We heard more about him as the days went on, stories from prisoners, from intercepted communications. He was a commander, they said, a man who had sworn to defend this land to the last breath. A man who inspired his soldiers to fight with a ferocity that defied logic, who had turned this war into something more than just a battle for territory. It was strange to think of him as a real person, someone who lived and breathed, who made decisions and gave orders. To me, he was becoming something else, a symbol of the resistance we were facing, of the Soviet resolve that refused to break. And the more I heard about him, the more that flicker of doubt in my. July 25th, 1941. The air smells of smoke and sweat, a heavy, suffocating mix that clings to everything. The ground beneath our feet is churned mud, thick and treacherous, a far cry from the hard, dusty roads we've marched on for weeks. Kiev is close now, so close I can almost see its ancient walls rising on the horizon. But between us and the city lies a battlefield, and the battle is far from won. This isn't the kind of war one imagined when we first set out. Back then, the fighting was swift. Decisive our advance, a relentless tide washing over everything in its path. But now, we're mired in something far more grueling, a conflict that drags on day after day, sapping our strength and our spirits. The Soviets have dug in, refusing to yield even an inch without a fight. And it's beginning to take its toll on all of us. The morning started with artillery fire, a thunderous roar that shook the earth and left my ears ringing. We were ordered to push forward, to take a ridge that the Soviets had fortified overnight. I remember the briefing our officers spoke of it as if it were just another objective, another box to tick on the way to victory. But as we climbed that ridge, it became clear that this would be no simple task. The Soviets were waiting for us, their positions hidden among the rocks and trees. Machine guns opened up as we neared the summit, cutting through our ranks with brutal efficiency. I could feel the air vibrate with each burst, the ground beneath me trembling as the shells hit. The noise was deafening, a cacophony of screams, explosions, and the relentless rattle of gunfire. We had no choice but to keep moving. There was no cover, no place to hide, only the forward momentum that was drilled into us from day one. I could feel the sweat running down my back, mixing with the dirt and grime that covered my skin. My uniform was soaked, my boots caked in mud. The rifle in my hands felt heavier with each step, the weight of it dragging me down. Beside me, Carl was breathing hard, his face set in a grim mask of concentration. I could see the determination in his eyes, the way he clenched his jaw as we moved forward. There was no room for hesitation, no time to think about anything other than the next step, the next breath. It was all about survival, now getting through this day, this hour, this minute. We reached the crest of the ridge just as the sun broke through the clouds, casting a harsh light over the battlefield. The scene that greeted us was one of devastation. The Soviets had fortified their positions with barbed wire, sandbags, and trenches dug deep into the earth. Their red banners fluttered in the wind, a stark contrast to the smoke and dust that filled the air. And there were the bodies scattered across the ground like broken dolls, both Soviet and German, a testament to the brutality of the fight. Down. Take cover. The order came just in time, as another volley of machine gun fire raked across our position. I threw myself to the ground, feeling the impact in every bone as I hit the dirt. Bullets whizzed overhead, kicking up dust and debris. The world around me was a blur of noise and chaos, every sense overwhelmed by the sheer intensity of it all. We returned fire, but it felt like a losing battle. For every Soviet we took down, another seemed to take his place, their numbers unending, their resolve unbroken. I could see them moving in the trenches, shadows darting between the sandbags, their faces hidden beneath helmets and scarves. They were like phantoms, impossible to pin down, always one step ahead. I don't know how long we held that position. Minutes, hours. Time lost all meaning in the midst of that battle, the minutes stretching into eternity. I fired until my rifle was too hot to hold, until my fingers were numb from the effort. My throat was raw from shouting, my eyes stinging from the smoke. All around me, men were falling, their bodies crumpling to the ground, their cries lost in the din. And then, just as suddenly as it began, the assault stopped. The Soviets pulled back, retreating into their trenches, leaving the ridge in our hands. We had taken the position, but it felt like a hollow victory. The cost was too high, the casualties too many. The ground was littered with the dead and dying, the earth stained red with blood. I couldn't bring myself to look too closely, to see the faces of the men I had fought beside only moments before. We regrouped. Our numbers dwindled, our energy spent. The officers were quick to order a counterattack, to press the advantage while we still had it. But the men were slow to respond, their movements sluggish, their eyes glazed with exhaustion. We had given everything we had, and there was little left to give. As we prepared to move out again, I caught sight of Carl sitting on a rock, his head in his hands. His rifle lay at his feet, forgotten. I walked over, my legs feeling like lead, and sat down beside him. For a long time, neither of us said anything. We just sat there, surrounded by the aftermath of the battle, the smell of gunpowder and death thick in the air. Finally, Carl spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. How much more of this? Do you think? His question hung in the air, heavy with the weight of everything we had been through. I didn't have an answer. I wanted to tell him that it would be over soon, that we were close to victory, that all of this would be worth it in the end. But the words wouldn't come. I couldn't bring myself to lie, not when the truth was staring us in the face. Instead, I just shook my head, my throat too tight to speak. We both knew the reality of it. This war was far from over, and the strain of it was beginning to show, not just in our bodies, but in our minds, in the way we looked at each other, at the enemy, at the road ahead. We had set out with such confidence, such certainty, but now there was only doubt, and the gnawing fear that we might not make it through this after all. The orders came, and we stood, our bodies protesting with every movement. We shouldered our rifles, adjusted our helmets, and prepared to move out once more. There was no time to rest, no time to mourn the dead. The battle was still raging, and we were needed on the front line. As we marched forward, I tried to focus on the task at hand, to push the thoughts of what we had just endured to the back of my mind. But it was impossible. The images were seared into my memory, the bodies, the blood, the sounds of men dying all around me. I could feel the strain in every muscle, every bone, a weight that was becoming harder and harder to bear. And then there was the knowledge that this was only the beginning. The Soviets weren't going to give up easily. They were fighting for their homeland, for something they believed in, and they were willing to die for it. How could we, soldiers from a land far away, compete with that kind of resolve? I kept my head down, my thoughts churning as we marched. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the battlefield. The air was cooling, but the heat of the day still clung to us, a reminder of the battle we had just fought. Ahead of us, the road stretched on, leading us closer to Kiev, to the city that was now our ultimate goal. But as the day faded into night, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were marching into something far darker, far more dangerous than we had ever imagined. The strain of the battle was beginning to show, and I wondered how much more we could take before we broke. July 29th, 1941. The days blend together now, each one a repetition of the last. We march, we fight, we sleep if we're lucky. The strain is etched into every face, in the way the men move, in the way they talk, or don't talk at all. Conversations that once flowed easily now consist of grunts and nods, the bare minimum needed to communicate. We're conserving our energy, saving it for the next battle, the next push forward. We're close to Kiev now, close enough to feel it in the air, in the way the Soviets fight harder with each passing day. They know we're coming, and they're doing everything they can to stop us. Every inch of ground is contested, every advance met with fierce resistance. It's a war of attrition, a brutal, grinding conflict that leaves no room for mercy or compassion. I've seen things in these past few days that I never thought I would see, things that will haunt me for the rest of my life. The faces of the men we've lost, the terror in their eyes as they fell. The way the Soviets fight, with a desperation that is both admirable and terrifying. And always, the sound of gunfire in the distance, a constant reminder that there is no escape from this hell. August 2nd, 1941. The Soviet soldier's face, barely visible in the dim pre-dawn light, is etched into my memory like a ghost. We captured him during a skirmish near the village of Piskivka, a nondescript place that on any other day might have gone unnoticed. He was just a boy, really no older than 18, with the kind of hollow cheeks and sunken eyes that spoke of hardship. His uniform was ragged, a patchwork of repairs and stains, but his posture was unyielding, his gaze defiant even as our officers interrogated him. I watched from a distance, my rifle slung over my shoulder, as they tried to break him. But no matter what they threatened, no matter how harsh their words, he said nothing. His silence was a shield, one that seemed to frustrate our interrogators to no end. I could see the anger building in their eyes, the way their hands twitched with the desire to do more than just talk. But there was something in that boy's eyes that gave them pause, something that, deep down, I think they recognized. It was the same look we had seen in every Soviet prisoner we had captured, every soldier who had fallen at our feet. A look that spoke of a spirit unbroken, a resolve that went beyond mere survival. When they finally gave up, leaving him in the hands of the guards, I couldn't help but approach. I needed to see for myself what it was that kept these men fighting, what it was that made them so relentless in the face of almost certain defeat. As I neared him, he turned his head, his eyes meeting mine with an intensity that sent a shiver down my spine. "Why do you keep fighting?" I asked. my voice barely a whisper, as if speaking too loudly might shatter the fragile moment. He didn't answer at first, just stared at me with those hollow eyes that seemed to hold the weight of 1,000 sorrows. But then, slowly he spoke, his voice low and rough, like gravel scraping against stone. "For the motherland," he said, the words heavy with meaning, with something I couldn't quite grasp. I wanted to ask more, to understand what drove him, what fueled that fire I saw in his eyes. But before I could, the guards took him away, leaving me standing there with my questions unanswered, my thoughts in turmoil. August 10th, 1941. The days have grown longer, the nights colder, as we continue our march toward Kiev. The city is close now, closer than ever, but the path to it is littered with obstacles, with resistance that seems to grow stronger the nearer we get. It's as if the Soviets know that this is their last stand, their final chance to hold us back, and they're throwing everything they have into the fight. And what a fight it is. Every day, we're met with ambushes, with sniper fire from hidden positions, with mines buried in the roads that claim the lives of men I've come to know as brothers. The landscape itself seems to conspire against us: thick forests that provide cover for the enemy, swamps that slow our advance to a crawl, and rivers that swell with the summer rains, turning crossings into deadly gambles. But it's not just the terrain or the tactics that wear us down, it's the sheer determination of the enemy. We've been taught to think of them as inferior, as poorly trained and equipped, but nothing could be further from the truth. They fight with a ferocity that takes us by surprise time and time again, their attacks sudden and brutal, their defenses stubborn and unyielding. I've seen it in their eyes, the same look I saw in that boy's eyes, the look of men who have nothing left to lose, who will fight to the last breath, to the last bullet, to the last man. It's a kind of courage that I can't help but admire, even as I face it across the battlefield, even as I raise my rifle and take aim. And then there are the stories, the rumors that spread like wildfire through our ranks, stories of Soviet women fighting alongside the men, of partisans striking from the shadows, of entire villages rising up against us. It's hard to know what's true and what's just fear talking, but the effect is the same. Every step forward feels heavier, every mile a greater burden, as we wonder what new horrors await us. We've lost so many already good men who were full of life and laughter when we first set out, now lying cold in shallow graves far from home. And for what? To push forward a few more miles, to take a few more villages, to drive the enemy back a little further. The victories we win feel hollow, the ground we gain soaked in blood. But still, we press on. There's no turning back now, no room for doubt or hesitation. The orders come down and we follow them, because that's what we've been trained to do. We tell ourselves that the end is in sight, that Kiev will fall and this nightmare will be over. But in the quiet moments, when the gunfire has stopped and the night is still, the doubts creep in. What if Kiev isn't the end? What if this is just the beginning of something far worse, something we can't even begin to imagine? The thought haunts me, lurking at the edges of my mind, but I push it away, bury it deep where it can't reach me. There's no room for fear, no time for questions. There's only the march, the fight, the relentless push forward. August 18th, 1941. We reached the outskirts of Kiev today. The city looms before us, its ancient walls scarred by the battles that have raged around it. The Dnieper River flows sluggishly beside it, a natural barrier that the Soviets have turned into a fortress, with artillery positioned on the far bank, ready to rain down fire on any who dare approach. But it's not just the defenses that give me pause, it's the city itself. A place of history and culture, of people who have lived here for generations. And now, it's a battleground, a place where lives will be lost, where dreams will be shattered, where history will be rewritten in blood. We've been ordered to prepare for the assault, to gather our strength for the final push. But as we set up camp on the outskirts, as we dig in and wait for the order to attack, I can't shake the feeling that we're up against something far greater than just a city or an army. We're facing a people who refuse to be conquered, a spirit that refuses to be broken. I see it in the faces of the Soviet prisoners we've captured, in the stories they tell of their comrades who have fallen but never surrendered. I hear it in the voices of the civilians we pass, their eyes full of anger and defiance even as they are forced to leave their homes behind. And I feel it in the air, in the very ground beneath my feet, as if the city itself is alive, is resisting us. The officers tell us that victory is within our grasp, that Kiev will fall and the war will turn in our favor. But I've learned not to trust those words, not to believe in easy victories. The Soviets have shown us time and time again that they will not go quietly, that they will fight to the bitter end, and I have no doubt that Kiev will be no different. We've been worn down by weeks of fighting, by the relentless strain of battle, but the Soviets, they seem to draw strength from it. Every setback, every loss only seems to harden their resolve, to fuel their determination to keep fighting. It's as if they have nothing left to lose, and in a way, that makes them more dangerous than ever. I wonder what it must be like to fight for something you truly believe in, to be willing to die for it without hesitation. We're fighting for orders, for a cause that's been drilled into us by our superiors, but the Soviets, they're fighting for their homes, for their families, for their very way of life. It's a difference that's becoming harder and harder to ignore, and one that's beginning to weigh on me more than I care to admit. The assault on Kiev will begin soon, and with it, the final test of our strength, of our resolve. But as I sit here, staring out at the city that will soon be the site of our greatest battle yet, I can't help but feel a deep sense of unease. The Soviets have shown us what they're capable of, what they're willing to do to defend what's theirs, and I know that the fight ahead will be nothing like we've faced before. The relentless Soviet spirit is something I can't fully understand, something that both terrifies and fascinates me in equal measure. And as we prepare to launch our assault on Kiev, I can't shake the feeling that, no matter the outcome, this battle will change us all in ways we can't yet comprehend. We're marching toward a city, yes, but we're also marching towards something far greater, far more profound, and I can only hope that, when it's all over, we'll still recognize the men we were when we first set out on this long, dark journey. September 1st, 1941. Kiev is ours. The city that stood defiant for so long has finally fallen, and with it, the pride of the Soviet army has crumbled. The swastika now flies over the ancient city walls, a symbol of our victory, of our dominance. But as I walk through the streets, I can't help but feel that this victory has come at a price far greater than we anticipated. The battle for Kiev was unlike anything we had faced before. It was a brutal, grinding fight that seemed to drag on for eternity, with every inch of ground contested, every street, every building a fortress to be stormed. The Soviets fought with a ferocity that was both admirable and terrifying, their determination unwavering even as their numbers dwindled and their defenses crumbled. We launched the final assault at dawn, the sky painted with the first light of day as we moved in. The air was thick with the smell of smoke and gunpowder, the ground beneath our boots slick with blood and mud. The city's defenders had pulled back to the center, where they made their last stand among the ruins of their homes and the rubble of their once great city. The fighting was fierce house-to-house combat, every doorway, every window a potential death trap. We moved through the narrow streets in small squads, our rifles at the ready, our nerves stretched to the breaking point. The Soviets had turned the city into a labyrinth of traps and ambushes, using every advantage they had to slow our advance. They fought like men possessed, as if the fate of the world rested on their shoulders. I'll never forget the sounds, the screams of the wounded, the crack of rifle fire, the deafening roar of artillery as our guns pounded the city into submission. The noise was overwhelming, a constant barrage that left my ears ringing, my head pounding. But there was no time to think, no time to rest. We pushed forward, driven by orders, by the need to finish what we had started. We lost many men that day, good men who had marched with me through Poland, through France, through the vast expanses of Russia. Their bodies now lie among the rubble. their names already fading from memory as the battle raged on. I can still see their faces, the looks of determination, of fear, of resignation in their eyes as we charged into the fray. There was no turning back, no escape from the hell we had created. Victory was the only option, the only way out of the nightmare we had been living for weeks. And so we fought, and we bled, and we killed, until finally, the Soviet resistance broke, and the city was ours. September 3rd, 1941. The streets of Kiev are eerily quiet now, the sounds of battle replaced by an oppressive silence that weighs heavily on all of us. The city is in ruins, its buildings reduced to rubble, its people those who survived walking like ghosts through the wreckage of their homes. There's no joy in this victory, no sense of triumph, only exhaustion, and a deep, abiding sadness that seeps into every corner of my being. We've been ordered to secure the city, to root out any remaining resistance, but the fight has gone out of the Soviets. What few soldiers remain have either surrendered or melted away into the countryside, leaving behind a city that is more graveyard than capital. There are no cheers, no celebrations, only the grim task of counting the dead, of burying our fallen comrades, of trying to make sense of the destruction we've wrought. I walk through the streets, my rifle slung over my shoulder, my boots kicking up dust with each step. The buildings that once stood tall and proud are now nothing more than piles of stone and twisted metal, the result of our relentless bombardment. The air is thick with the stench of death, of decay, of a city that has been gutted from the inside out. Here and there, I see the faces of the city's residents, peering out from the shadows, their eyes hollow with fear and grief. They watch us with a mixture of hatred and resignation, their homes destroyed, their lives shattered by a war they never asked for. I try not to meet their gaze, try to ignore the gnawing guilt that claws at my insides. But it's impossible to escape. We've won, yes, but at what cost? This city, this once beautiful city, is now little more than a monument to the horrors of war, a testament to the price of victory. The people who lived here, who called this place home, have lost everything: their families, their friends, their futures. And for what? A few more miles of territory. A strategic victory that will be forgotten in the grand sweep of history. The weight of it all presses down on me, a crushing burden that I struggle to carry. I think of the men we lost, of the friends who will never return home, who will never see their families again. I think of the lives we've destroyed, of the people who will never rebuild, who will never recover from what we've done here. And I wonder, was it worth it? Was this victory, this hollow, bitter victory, worth the cost? September 6th, 1941. The days pass slowly now, each one blending into the next, as we go about the grim business of occupation. There's little to do but patrol the streets, to maintain order in a city that has been stripped of its life, of its soul. The Soviets are gone, their army shattered, their people subdued. But there's no sense of accomplishment, no feeling of pride in what we've achieved. Instead, there's a growing unease, a sense that this victory has come at a price we can't yet fully comprehend. We've won the battle, but in doing so, we've lost something far more important: our humanity, our sense of what's right and just. We've become something less than men, something harder, colder, more brutal. The officers speak of our triumph, of the glory of our conquest, but their words ring hollow in my ears. I see the same doubts in their eyes, the same questions that haunt me in the quiet moments when the noise of battle has faded, and all that remains is the silence of a city in mourning. We've won the battle for Kiev, but in doing so, we've lost ourselves. The price of victory has been paid in blood, in the lives of the men who fought and died here, in the destruction of a city that will never be the same. And as I stand among the ruins, I can't help but wonder if this war, this endless, senseless war, will ever truly be won. The Soviet spirit may have been crushed, but it hasn't been broken. Even in defeat, they remain defiant, their resolve unshaken. And I fear that in the end, it is we who will be broken by this war, by the weight of the lives we've taken, by the horrors we've witnessed, by the cost of a victory that will haunt us for the rest of our days. September 10th, 1941. We've been given orders to move out, to leave Kiev and continue our advance into the heart of the Soviet Union. The city will be left in the hands of the occupying forces to be rebuilt, to be pacified. But as we prepare to leave, I can't shake the feeling that we're leaving something behind, something vital, something that can never be regained. Victory was supposed to bring us glory, honor, a sense of purpose. But instead, it has brought only pain, loss, and a deep, abiding sense of emptiness. We've won the battle, but the war rages on, and with each step forward, I feel us sinking deeper into a quagmire from which there may be no escape. As we march out of Kiev, the city receding into the distance, I try to push the thoughts from my mind to focus on the road ahead. But the weight of what we've done here, of the lives we've destroyed, of the cost of our victory, lingers like a shadow, a dark cloud that hangs over us all. And I know that no matter how far we march, no matter how many battles we win, the memory of Kiev will stay with me, a reminder of the true cost of war, a cost that can never be measured in miles gained or enemies defeated, but in the lives lost, in the souls shattered, in the humanity sacrificed on the altar of victory. October 1st, 1941. It has been weeks since we left Kiev, and yet the city remains with me, a ghost that haunts my every thought. The war has moved on, taking us deeper into the vast expanse of the Soviet Union, but Kiev, its ruins, its people, its blood-soaked streets refuses to fade into the past. It lingers in my mind, in the quiet moments between battles, in the darkness before sleep claims me. The pace of the war has slowed, but the brutality has not. We press on through endless fields and forests, through villages that have been reduced to smoldering ash, through landscapes that seem as desolate as our souls. The Soviet resistance has not broken, only retreated deeper into their homeland, where they continue to fight with the same tenacity, the same relentless spirit that we faced in Kiev. But something has changed in us. The men I march with are not the same as those who set out on this campaign. The camaraderie, the sense of purpose, the belief in our cause, it has all been eroded by what we have seen, by what we have done. We are weary, our spirits dulled, our hearts hardened by the horrors we have witnessed. The victory in Kiev, once a source of pride, now feels hollow, empty. The cost of that victory weighs heavily on us all, a burden that grows with each passing day. We speak less now, the conversations that once filled our nights reduced to murmurs, to brief exchanges of necessary words. There is no laughter, no joy, only the grim determination to survive, to see this war through to whatever bitter end awaits us. October 12th, 1941. As the days blend into one another, the aftermath of Kiev continues to ripple through our ranks. News from the city trickles in, carried by messengers and captured reports. The Soviets have not given up. Their partisans harass our supply lines, sabotage our efforts to rebuild, and strike fear into the hearts of the occupation forces left behind. The stories we hear are grim. Soviet snipers hidden in the ruins, picking off soldiers one by one, ambushes on patrols that venture too far from the safety of the garrison, entire units disappearing into the forests, never to be seen again. The city may have fallen, but its people continue to resist, their spirit unbroken despite the devastation we wrought. It is not just the Soviets who suffer in the aftermath. Our own men have been changed by what they experienced in Kiev. Some have been driven to the edge, their minds unable to cope with the horrors they witnessed, the atrocities they were ordered to commit. There are whispers of men turning their weapons on themselves, unable to bear the weight of their guilt, their shame. Others have become cold, detached, their humanity stripped away by the relentless march of war. They follow orders without question, without hesitation, but there is a deadness in their eyes, a hollowness that speaks of souls lost to the darkness. They are no longer men, but machines of war, driven by a purpose they no longer understand. I see it in myself, too, the way I have changed since Kiev. The things that once disturbed me no longer have the same effect. The sight of a burning village, the sound of a child's cry, the smell of death, these things no longer elicit the horror they once did. I have grown numb, desensitized to the suffering around me, to the pain and death that have become a constant companion. I tell myself that it is necessary, that this is the only way to survive the war, but deep down, I know that something precious has been lost. The part of me that once cared, that once felt, has been buried beneath layers of violence, of blood, of death. And I wonder, when this war is finally over, will I be able to find that part of myself again? October 20th, 1941. The rain has come, turning the roads to mud, slowing our advance to a crawl. The weather is just another enemy to contend with, as relentless and unforgiving as the Soviets themselves. We are cold, wet, and exhausted, our spirits ground down by the endless march, by the constant threat of attack, by the knowledge that there is no end in sight. But it is not just the physical toll that weighs on us, the psychological toll is even greater. The aftermath of Kiev has seeped into our minds, into our dreams, poisoning our thoughts, our hopes. I see it in the faces of the men around me, in the way they avoid each other's gaze, in the way they flinch at every sudden noise, every distant gunshot. We have become shadows of our former selves, hollowed out by the things we have seen, the things we have done. The camaraderie that once held us together has frayed, replaced by suspicion, by distrust. There are no more shared stories, no more shared laughter, only the grim silence of men who have seen too much, who have lost too much. The officers try to keep us focused, to push us forward with promises of victory, of glory. But their words ring hollow in our ears. We have seen what victory looks like, and we know the cost. Kiev was supposed to be a turning point, a decisive victory that would break the Soviet spirit, but all it has done is break us. And still, the Soviets fight on. They retreat before us, but they do not flee, they regroup, they rearm, they prepare for the next battle, the next stand. Their spirit, their resolve, is something we cannot understand, something that seems almost inhuman in its intensity. They fight for their homes, for their families, for their very existence, while we fight. For what? Orders? A cause that has long since lost its meaning. October 25th, 1941. The war drags on, but the victory in Kiev feels like a distant memory, a dream from another lifetime. The city is behind us now, far behind, but its shadow looms over everything we do. The aftermath of that battle has changed us all, in ways that cannot be undone, in ways that will haunt us for the rest of our lives. We march onward, but the weight of Kiev presses down on us, a constant reminder of the cost of this war, of the price we have paid for victory. We have lost so much, our comrades, our innocence, our humanity, and gained so little in return. The war stretches out before us, endless and unforgiving, and I wonder how much more we can endure before we too are broken beyond repair. As I lie awake at night, the sounds of the camp fading into the darkness, I think of Kiev, of the people we left behind, of the lives we destroyed in our pursuit of victory. And I wonder, when this war is finally over, when the last battle has been fought and the last bullet fired, will there be anything left of us to save? Will we ever be able to reclaim the parts of ourselves that we have lost? Or are we doomed to be forever haunted by the ghosts of Kiev? The aftermath of that battle lingers, a stain on our souls, a shadow on our hearts. And as we march deeper into the Soviet Union, as we face new battles, new horrors, I know that the memory of Kiev will never leave us. It will be with us always, a reminder of the true cost of war, a cost that can never be repaid, that can never be forgotten,